The alarm on my wrist was still going off when the message came through. I silenced both at the same time and stared at the ceiling of my bunk for exactly 3 seconds before sitting up. The message was short. It read, "Report to Admiral Crane, Diplomatic Wing, 0600, do not be late." I was not late. I was never late. That was one of the few things I was genuinely good at. Admiral Crane was already standing when I walked in, which meant he had been there a while, which meant this was worse than a normal bad morning. He was a broad man with gray at his temples and the kind of eyes that had seen enough to stop being surprised by anything. Behind him, through the wide window of the station's diplomatic wing, I could see the docking arm where the Vareth ship had arrived the night before. It was long and silver and shaped like something that had no interest in being understood. "Commander Hale," he said. "Sit down." I sat. "You know about the Vareth Compact?" "Yes, sir. Signed 3 days ago. 12 civilizations, 1 agreement. Humanity gets a seat at the table. That's the official version." He pulled up a display and turned it so I could see. "The unofficial version is that half the species at that table think we belong under it. The Vareth Dominion in particular has made it very clear, through channels I will not bore you with, that they consider humanity a temporary problem that will eventually solve itself." "Cheerful of them," I said. He did not smile. They made a gesture. "As part of the compact, the Vareth Dominion has offered to send a representative to live among us. Show of cultural exchange. A princess of their house," I waited. "Her name is Saratha of House Vel, 3rd daughter of the Dominion throne." He set down the display. "She arrives in 6 hours. You will be her escort, her liaison, and her point of contact for all matters relating to her stay on this station and later on Earth." I looked at him for a moment. "Sir, I'm a tactical officer. My record is in threat assessment and fleet coordination. I'm not a diplomat." "No," he said, "you are not. Which is exactly why you are the right person for this." He folded his hands on the desk. "I'm going to tell you something that you will not repeat, because if it leaves this room it becomes an incident, and I have enough of those already. The Vareth did not send us this woman as a gift. They sent her to us because they don't want her." I kept my face still. "She has been declared something called Velcora in their language. Our translators render it as empty-blooded. It is a designation given to Vareth women who are judged by their own medical system to be unable to carry children. In their culture, a noble woman with that label has no dynastic value. She cannot be married into an alliance. She cannot extend a bloodline. She is, by their standards, finished." He said the last word quietly, like it tasted bad. "Sending her to us is an insult. To her and to humanity both. It says that we are the kind of people you give unwanted things to." The morning light through the window was cold and blue. The Vareth ship sat at the docking arm without moving, like it was waiting for something. "They expect us to be embarrassed," I said. "They expect us to be embarrassed," he agreed. "Or to send her back, which would be an even bigger diplomatic wound, because then we've rejected their gesture and insulted the House of Vel directly. And if we keep her and treat her well, then we've done something they genuinely did not plan for." He stood. "Which is why I want you on this. Hale, you don't perform, you don't preen, you just do the work. That is exactly what this situation calls for. Do not make her feel like a political problem. Do not make her feel like a charity case. Treat her like a person. And if she doesn't want to be treated like a person?" He picked up his coffee. "Then you find out what she does want and you work from there." I walked to the docking arm with 2 junior staff members trailing behind me and a translation earpiece humming quietly in my right ear. The corridor leading from the airlock to the station's reception bay was the nicest one on the entire installation. White walls, warm lighting, a floor that did not vibrate from the engine room 3 decks below. Someone had put a small display of earth plants in the corner. They looked hopeful and slightly out of place, which felt appropriate. The airlock cycled open. She walked out first, ahead of her own escort, which told me something. Saratha of House Vel was tall, even accounting for the fact that most Vareth were taller than humans. She was silver-skinned in the way that their people were, not metallic, not cold, but the kind of silver that light moved through rather than bounced off. Her eyes were amber, a deep warm amber, and they swept the room in about 2 seconds flat, cataloging everything. Her hair was dark, pulled back, and she wore what I later learned was traveling clothes for a Vareth noble, which still looked like armor by human standards, structured and precise and with no loose edges anywhere. Behind her came 2 attendants and a cultural liaison officer named Drev, who was already producing a data tablet and looking like someone who had prepared extensively for this meeting, and was anxious to prove it. I stepped forward. "Princess Saratha," I said, "my name is Marcus Hale. I'm a commander with Earth's Fleet Coordination Division, and I've been assigned as your escort and liaison for your stay with us." On behalf of humanity and the stations of the Allied Earth Compact, welcome. She looked at me, not through me, not past me, at me the way you look at something you're trying to understand. Then she said, in clear, flat standard, you are the small one. The translation earpiece gave me the literal Vareth version too, which was slightly less diplomatic. I kept my expression the same. Compared to Vareth, most of us are, I said. We make up for it in other ways. Can I show you to your quarters? She held my gaze for another moment. Then she turned to Drev and said something in Vareth that my earpiece rendered as, note that the human did not flinch. And then she walked past me down the corridor. I followed. The 3 days after that were quiet in the way that a held breath is quiet. Saritha did not speak to me unless she needed something, and she needed very little. She ate in her quarters, spent hours reviewing data on a screen I was not invited to look at, and walked the station corridors at odd hours, always alone, always looking at things with that same cataloging amber gaze I did not push. I checked in twice a day, made sure everything she needed was available, handled the 7 or 8 small bureaucratic fires that came up every time a foreign dignitary was on station, and otherwise gave her space. She seemed to notice this. She did not comment on it. On the morning of the 4th day, I was sitting at the small table outside her quarters, working through a stack of fleet coordination reports, when she opened her door and looked at me. You work there every morning, she said. There's a coffee station around the corner, I said. Good light. She looked at the stack of documents. Those are tactical readouts. Yes, for the orbital platform network above your 3rd planet, Earth. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, your Eastern Hemisphere grid has a gap in its coverage pattern. Sector 9 and Sector 14 share a relay node that services both. If that node fails, both sectors lose coverage simultaneously. No overlap, no backup. I looked at her. Then I looked at the readouts. I had been working on this network analysis for 2 weeks, and I had not seen that. I'm going to need a pen, I said. She sat down across from me and pointed at the diagram. And that was the first real conversation we had. When I submitted the revised coverage report to Admiral Crane the next morning, I listed the source of the correction clearly. He called me in 20 minutes later. You sourced this to Princess Saratha, he said. She found it, I said. It's her work. He looked at me for a long moment. The Vareth sent her here because they thought she was worthless, he said quietly. They were wrong, I said. He looked back at the report. Yes, he said, it appears they were. I walked out of his office and back down the corridor toward the coffee station and the table where I worked, and I thought about a woman who had spent years being told she had no value, who had sat down across from a stranger and within 10 minutes spotted something that a dozen fleet analysts had missed. I thought, they have no idea what they threw away. And I thought, I need to find out if we can give it back to her. The weeks that followed moved quickly in the way that busy things do, where you look up one morning and realize a month has passed without you. Noticing, Saratha settled into a rhythm that was entirely her own. She rose early, reviewed data, walked the station, and spent 3 hours each afternoon in the observation deck, watching the stars with a stillness that I respected enough not to interrupt. In the mornings, she had started sitting at the table outside her quarters while I worked. We did not always talk. Sometimes she read. Sometimes I drafted reports. But the silence between us became a comfortable one, which is a particular kind of progress. She was, I discovered over time, extraordinarily intelligent in a way that she had clearly been trained not to display. She knew fleet tactics, diplomatic history, 3 human languages she had learned before arriving, and the internal structural weaknesses of every major species warship design in the conclave. She had opinions on all of it. When she chose to share those opinions, they were precise, clear, and almost always correct. The first time I saw her frustration crack through was in a coordination meeting about the Vareth Cultural Exchange Program. A junior diplomat named Philip Greer, 24 years old, 3 weeks out of the diplomatic academy, and deeply in love with the sound of his own voice, was presenting a proposal to the delegation. In the middle of his presentation, he made a joke. It was aimed at Saratha, or rather at her situation, and it used the word Velcora, with a pronunciation that was close enough to write that you could tell he had looked it up specifically to use it. The room went quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when something wrong has just happened in public. I set down my pen. Greer, I said. He turned to me with the expression of someone who does not yet understand that they have done something serious. Step outside. Wait in the corridor, Commander. I was just... Step outside, I said again. Now. He stepped outside. I looked at the rest of the room, which was looking at the table. I did not look at Saratha because I did not want to add to whatever she was, feeling by making it a moment she had to perform through. I finished the meeting. It took another 12 minutes. When it ended, I walked into the corridor, spoke to Greer for 4 minutes, and then walked with him directly to Admiral Crane's office, where I requested Greer's transfer off the diplomatic delegation. The request was approved before dinner. That evening, Saratha knocked on the door of my office. She stood in the doorway for a moment without speaking, which was a thing she did when she was deciding how much to say. "You had him removed," she said. "Yes," without making a speech about it, without explaining to the room why it was wrong. "It was already wrong," I said. "Explaining why takes time away from fixing it." She was quiet for a moment. In the Dominion, when someone was insulted at a public function, the response was always political. A statement, a countermove, something that served the House. She looked at me carefully. "You did it because it was the right thing to do." "Yes," I said. "That's an unusual reason," she said. "Maybe for where you've been," I said. "Not for where I come from." She looked at me for a long time. Then she said very quietly, "Humans are strange." And she went back to her quarters. But the next morning she was at the table earlier than I was. I had been thinking, quietly and carefully, about something Dr. Nair had mentioned in a briefing 6 weeks earlier. Dr. Priya Nair led the Interspecies Medical Institute on Luna, a facility that had been established 18 months ago to address exactly the kind of medical questions that arose when 12 species started living and working near each other. She had said something in passing during that briefing, almost as a footnote to a longer point about cross-species diagnostic compatibility. She had said that the Vareth medical scan used to determine fertility status was one of the oldest unchanged diagnostic tools in the conclave. She had said that by human standards, it was roughly equivalent to relying on a single blood marker to determine a complex biological condition without any cross-referencing. I had written it down. I had not said anything about it, because it was not my place and it was not the right moment. But I had written it down. I sent Dr. Nair a message that evening. I did not mention Saratha by name. I asked a general question about the Vareth Velcora diagnostic process and whether she had done any research into its accuracy. She responded within an hour. The response was 3 paragraphs long and ended with, "Where is this coming from, Marcus? Because if you're asking what I think you're asking, I have some very interesting data to share with you." I wrote back, "I'll call you tomorrow." I called her the next morning from my office with the door closed. Dr. Nair appeared on the screen the way she always did, energized, slightly out of breath, hair that looked like she had been moving fast before she sat down. She had been working at the Institute for 2 years, and she had the look of someone who had found the work of their life. "Tell me what you know," she said immediately. So I told her. I told her about the diagnostic process the Vareth used. I told her what I understood of the Velcora designation from the cultural briefings I had received. I told her what I knew about Saratha, not the political dimensions, but the medical ones. I told her that a woman had been declared biologically incomplete, based on a scan that had not been updated in centuries, by a civilization that had somehow never thought to question it. Dr. Nair listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Marcus," she said, "the Vareth diagnostic checks for one specific hormonal expression, 1, in a biological system that, based on the comparative xenobiology work we have done here, has at least 14 relevant variables." She leaned forward slightly. "We have done scans on 7 Vareth individuals who came through the Institute for various reasons over the past year. 3 of them showed what the Vareth system would have flagged as Velcora. Our analysis showed nothing abnormal in 2 of those 3 cases. Nothing. The marker was present differently, expressed along a variant pathway. It is not a defect, it is a variation." I felt something settle in my chest that I had not known was unsettled. "Would you be willing to do a full assessment? On a private patient? Someone who has already received the Velcora classification?" "I would clear my entire week for it," she said. Asking Saratha was the hardest part, and I had known it would be. I chose a morning when the station was quiet and we were sitting at the table in our usual way, me with reports, her with a data review, and I said, with no preparation and no softening because I had learned that she responded better to directness, "I have been speaking with a doctor, a specialist at the Interspecies Medical Institute on Luna. She works in xenobiology and has done comparative research on Vareth biology. She has some questions about the accuracy of the Velcora diagnostic process. She would like to do a full assessment on a Vareth individual who has received that classification." Saratha did not look up from her screen immediately. She finished the sentence she was reading first. Then she looked at me. "You have been researching this," she said. "Yes. How long?" "Since about 6 weeks after you arrived." She looked at me for a long time. Her expression was not easy to read. And I had learned by then that this meant she was processing something she had not expected, and was not sure how to respond to. I was declared Velcora when I was 17, she said, by a physician who had done the same scan on 400 women before me. It took 11 minutes. I was told the results were conclusive and that they would not change. Her voice was even. She had clearly said this before, or thought it enough times that the words came without difficulty. I have spent 20 years as a woman with no dynastic value. I was educated thoroughly because education was all that was considered appropriate to invest in me. I am here because my family wanted a way to remove me from their calculations without appearing to do so. I know, I said, and you think a human doctor can determine that 20 years of that was based on a mistake. I think it's worth finding out, I said. You don't have to. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you that the option exists, and that Dr. Nair is someone I trust completely, and that whatever she finds stays between you and her and me unless you choose otherwise. She looked at the stars through the observation port at the end of the corridor. Then she looked back at her screen. Then she looked at me. What is the doctor's name again, she said. Dr. Priya Nair. Set up the appointment, she said, and she went back to her reading. The flight to Luna took 4 hours. We did not talk much during it. There was a point somewhere over the dark side of the Earth where Saratha looked, out of the small viewport at the planet below, blue and white and impossibly green in the lit portions, and said almost to herself, "It is a very young color." The planet, I said. The light it reflects, she said. Young stars have that quality. Young things do. She was quiet for a moment. Varith Prime is older. The light there is heavier. I thought about that for the rest of the flight. Dr. Nair's Institute was a low, wide building nestled into the Luna surface near the Shackleton Rim, with a transparent ceiling in the main hall that let in the full black of space overhead. She met us at the entrance personally, which she had insisted on. She was warm without being effusive, professional without being cold, and she shook Saratha's hand with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times. I've reviewed everything available on Varith Diagnostic Medicine that our databases hold, she said to Saratha as they walked. I want to be clear before we begin. I'm not here to challenge your culture's conclusions. I'm here to see if we missed something. Whether we have or haven't, you'll know everything I know by the time we're done, Saratha said. That is more than I was ever promised before. The assessment took 6 hours. I waited in Dr. Nair's office and drank 3 cups of coffee and read half a report on deep-range communication. Relays without taking in a single word. When Dr. Nair came to get me, her face was careful, controlled, but her eyes were bright. Come in, she said. Saratha was sitting in a chair near the scan console. She was very still. Dr. Nair pulled up the results on the main screen. She walked through them clearly, without jargon, explaining each element in terms that both of us could follow. The Varith diagnostic had flagged a specific hormonal marker as absent. It was correct that the marker expressed differently in Saratha's biology, but it was not absent. It followed a pathway that occurred in approximately 1 in 9 Varith females, a documented variant, known in Old Varith biological literature but not incorporated into the standard diagnostic protocol for almost 3 centuries. Saratha was not Velcora. She had never been Velcora. The room was very quiet. I watched Saratha's face and I saw something move through it that was not happiness, not relief, not anything simple. It was something that had no clean name. The expression of someone who has just been told that a door that had been sealed in front of them for 20 years was never actually locked. That all the years they spent living in a room they were told they had to stay in were years they did not have to spend that way. Her hands resting on her knees were perfectly still. Everything else about her face was not. Dr. Nair said very quietly, I'm sorry it took this long. Saratha did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was controlled, but only just. It took this long, she said, because no one thought it was worth looking. I did not say anything. I did not tell her I was sorry. I did not tell her it would be all right. I had learned by then that there are moments where the most useful thing a person can offer is simply to stay in the room and not make the moment about themselves. So I stayed. We were there for another hour while Dr. Nair answered questions and explained implications and printed documentation in both standard and Varith script. When we finally left, the lunar surface outside was as stark and silent as always. But the walk back to the transit pod felt different from the walk in. Saratha moved the same way she always moved, with her spine straight and her pace exact. But something had changed in the quality of her silence. In the pod, as we rose back toward the transport station, she said, You spent 6 weeks building a case you were not certain about before you brought it to me. Yes, I said. You did not want to offer me hope that turned out to be nothing. Yes, she looked at the window. The earth filled most of it, enormous and close and lit on one side. In the Dominion, she said, people spent a great deal of effort calculating what things were worth before they invested in them. I was calculated at a low value and therefore received very little investment. It is a logical system. She paused. It is also a terrible one. It is, I said. She looked at me. Why do humans not operate that way? I thought about it for a moment. Some of us do, I said honestly. But most of us were raised on stories about people who didn't. And those are the stories we tell our children. So eventually that becomes the thing we try to be, even when we fail at it. She looked at me for a long time. That is a very inefficient way to build a culture, she said. Absolutely, I said, but we like it. And for the first time since she had stepped off the Vareth ship with her cataloging amber gaze, and her armor-like traveling clothes, and her weaponized silence, Saratha of Housefell smiled. It was small, it was brief, but it was real, and I saw it, and I filed it away in the same careful way I filed away fleet bigios, readouts, and threat assessments and things that mattered. The year that followed was one of those periods in a person's life that only reveals its shape when you look back at it. While you are living through it, it feels like a sequence of ordinary days. Then you look back and realize that every one of those ordinary days was building something. Saratha remained on the station. There was no formal declaration of this, no political statement. She simply continued to be there, working with me, sitting at the table, walking the corridors at odd hours. The diplomatic teams on both sides noticed and said nothing, which is the most productive form of diplomacy I have ever observed. She threw herself into the work of the Fleet Coordination Office with the same focused energy she had brought to spotting that coverage gap on the very first day. Over 6 months, she identified and helped resolve 11 separate structural weaknesses in Earth's defensive planning. Things our own analysts had missed, mostly because they had been looking at each problem individually, rather than as a system. Saratha thought in systems. She saw how things connected to other things, how a small failure in one place created pressure in another place 3 steps removed. It was the kind of thinking that is either taught very well or developed through years of living in a court where everything was connected to everything else, and getting something wrong had immediate personal consequences. She was credited, formally, for every contribution. I made sure of that. There was some pushback from people who thought it looked strange to have a Vareth national credited in Earth's defense planning documents. I told those people that accuracy and attribution was not optional and moved on. Nair's results had not changed Saratha's situation overnight, but they had changed something inside it. She moved differently. Not dramatically. She was not a person who did things dramatically, but the slight constrained quality that I had noticed in her first weeks, the way she held herself like someone who was accustomed to being watched for failure, began to ease. She asked more questions. She argued more directly when she disagreed with something, which was often and was always worth listening to. She also, I noticed, began to look at me differently. I am not a person who misses things. It is not a skill I developed on purpose. It is simply how I function. I notice details. I catalog them. I notice when someone's shoulders are slightly different than they were yesterday, when someone's word choices shift over a series of conversations, when someone begins to look at something, or someone, in a way that was not present before. I noticed all of that. I did not act on it immediately, because acting on it immediately would have been wrong. She was in a situation not of her choosing, working through information that had reshaped 2 decades of her understanding of herself. And the last thing she needed was a complication from the person who was supposed to be making her life easier. So I noticed, and I was careful, and I continued to do the work. The moment I acted on it was not dramatic. It was a Tuesday evening, which is as ordinary as days get. We had finished a long coordination session that had run past the dinner hour, and I had, as I often did at that point, ordered food to the conference room so we could eat and keep working. We were reviewing a long-range sensor map of the outer approaches to Earth's system, and Saratha had been questioning a set of assumptions in our threat modeling for about 40 minutes, and she was right about all of them. At some point we had stopped looking at the map and were just talking about the approach vectors, then about how the Vareth thought about defensive planning compared to how humans did, then about how different cultures defined safety, then about how she had grown up thinking she would spend her life preparing her younger sisters for a future she would not be part of. She said this last part quietly, without drama, looking at the table. And now, I said, she looked up at me. Now I'm having dinner in a human conference room arguing about sensor arrays with a man who credited my work in a defense report. She was quiet for a moment. It is very far from where I expected to be. Is it worse? I said. She looked at me, and she said no. That was the moment. Not a declaration, not a grand gesture, just the truth, plainly stated in a conference room on a Tuesday evening. We talked for another hour about things that had nothing to do with defense planning. The following spring, 11 months after she had arrived on the station, Admiral Crane called me into his office and told me that my position was being expanded to include a permanent role in the Joint Varith-Earth Coordination Initiative. He told me this with the careful expressionlessness of a man who had noticed something and had decided to accommodate it without commenting on it directly. The initiative will benefit from someone who has working relationship with the Varith representative, he said. Understood, sir, I said. Hail, he said, as I turned to leave. I stopped. Whatever you're doing, he said, keep doing it. She's good for this program. She's good for a lot of things, I said. And I left. I proposed to Saritha 6 months after that, not with ceremony, not with a speech. I simply told her that I wanted her to stay, not as a political assignment, not as a liaison, but because I could no longer imagine the work or the mornings, or the quiet, comfortable silences without her in them, and that if she felt differently about that, she could tell me and I would find a way to make it not strange between us. She was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, I was declared empty-blooded at 17. I was sent here as a political insult. I have spent the better part of 2 years watching you treat every single element of that situation as completely irrelevant to who I actually am. She looked at me. You are the most inconveniently decent person I have ever met, Marcus Hale, and I would very much like to stay. We were married in a small ceremony on Luna, in the same institute building where Dr. Nair had changed everything. The witnesses were Dr. Nair herself, Admiral Crane, 2 members of the Joint Coordination Team, and Drev, the Varith Cultural Attaché, who stood very straight throughout the ceremony with an expression that suggested he was absolutely fine and definitely not recalibrating his entire understanding of the situation. The Varith Dominion received official notification through the diplomatic channels. Their response was 3 days of silence, followed by a very carefully worded message expressing continued interest in the cultural exchange program. I filed that message in a folder and did not open it again. That evening, Saratha stood at the observation window of the Institute's main hall, looking out at the earth below, and she said, I used to think about the future in terms of what I was excluded from, what it was not possible for me to have. And now, I said, which was the same question I had asked her in the conference room on that Tuesday evening. She turned and looked at me. Now, she said, I think about what is possible. There is a specific quality to the quiet that exists in the hours before the world around you changes permanently. I had experienced it before the first contact signals were confirmed as genuine, before the Varith Compact was signed, before any of the moments that divided time into before and after. There is a stillness to those hours that only makes sense once you are on the other side of them. I experienced it again on a Thursday morning, 14 months after our wedding, when Saratha told me she thought we should call Dr. Nair. I looked at her across the table. The coffee in front of me was still hot. The morning light coming through the window was ordinary morning light. All right, I said. We called Dr. Nair together. She picked up within 2 rings. Saratha told her. In the clear, direct way she told everyone everything, what she had observed and why she thought it was worth investigating. Dr. Nair asked 3 questions. Then she said, come in today, don't wait. We went in that day. What followed was not a single dramatic moment but a series of careful, precise steps, the kind of steps that human medicine had built itself on, which was the belief that if you look closely enough and question your assumptions at every stage, you will eventually find the truth. Dr. Nair and her team worked through it with the focused energy that I had come to think of as characteristic of people who loved what they did and knew why it mattered. The confirmation came on a Friday afternoon. Dr. Nair sat across from us and said it clearly, without any decoration, because she was the kind of doctor who knew that the truth did not need decoration to be significant. Saratha of House Vel was expecting a child, a human Varith child, the first one in recorded history. I will not pretend that the next several minutes were orderly. I will say that at some point I was holding Saratha's hand very tightly, and she was holding mine equally tightly, and Dr. Nair was already pulling up research materials, with the bright, focused look of someone who had just discovered the most interesting challenge of their professional career. We are going to have to build the protocol for this from the ground up, she said, which was not a warning, the way it might have been coming from someone else. It was a statement of intent. There is no existing medical literature on human Varith gestation, so we are going to create it. I will need to assemble a team. I will need access to comparative xenobiology research across the conclave. And I am going to need you both to tell me everything you notice at every stage, because you are our primary source of data. That is a significant amount of trust to place in patients, Saratha said. Dr. Nair smiled. You are also my colleagues as far as I'm concerned, she said. This is the most important research project any of us will ever be involved in, and I intend to treat it accordingly. Saratha looked at her for a moment. When I was declared Velcora, she said slowly. The physician who told me spent 11 minutes on the process. He answered no questions. He filed the document and left the room. I know, said Dr. Nair quietly. You are very different from him. Good, said Dr. Nair. And she got to work. The news was not something we announced. It spread anyway. That is the nature of significant things in small, interconnected communities. They do not stay contained no matter how carefully you try to hold them. Within the station, within the institute, within the joint coordination team, people learned. The reactions ranged from stunned silence to immediate and enthusiastic offers of help, which is the range of human reactions to unexpected and historically significant events. The Vareth Dominion learned approximately 6 weeks after we did. We knew they had learned because the volume of official Vareth diplomatic traffic increased measurably overnight, and because Drev came to my office with the expression of a man who had just been handed a message and was not sure whether to be the person who delivered it. He delivered it. It was from the Dominion High Council. It was long, carefully worded, and ultimately said 2 things. First, that the Dominion was deeply interested in monitoring the welfare of the Princess Saratha in light of recent developments, and second, that the Dominion would appreciate an opportunity to discuss the biological and cultural implications of the pregnancy with Earth's diplomatic team. They want to reclaim her, Saratha said when I showed it to her. Her voice was perfectly calm. They want access. I said, that is not the same thing. No, she said. What will you tell them? I'll tell them that my wife's medical care is being handled by the finest xenobiology team in the conclave, that she is in excellent health, and that she will communicate directly with anyone she chooses to communicate with when she chooses to do so. I looked at her. Is that all right? She looked at the message for a moment. Then she looked at me. Tell Drev to schedule a call, she said. I will speak to them myself. She did. I was not in the room for that call, because she had not asked me to be, and she did not need me to be. She was not asking for my help or my protection. She was simply choosing to handle something herself, which was a thing she was fully capable of and always had been. Drev told me afterward that she had been polite, precise, and utterly immovable. The Dominion delegation had suggested several times, in various phrasings, that perhaps Saratha would be more comfortable receiving care on Vareth Prime, near her family, with physicians familiar with Vareth biology. She had responded to each suggestion with the information that she was already receiving care from someone who was actively building a new understanding of Vareth biology rather than operating from a 3-century-old framework, and that she would notify her family of any updates she felt were appropriate to share. The Dominion delegation, Drev said, had gone very quiet by the end. The pregnancy progressed through stages that Dr. Nair and her team documented with meticulous care. There were challenges. Of course there were challenges, because this was genuinely new territory, and new territory does not come without difficult terrain. There were weeks of adjustment, periods of uncertainty, where the team worked through the night reviewing data and adjusting the approach until they had an answer they were confident in. There were small setbacks and thoughtful recalibrations and long conversations between Dr. Nair and Saratha and me about what we knew and what we did not and what we were going to do next. Through all of it, Saratha was remarkable in a way that I should have expected, but that still surprised me. She approached the uncertainty the same way she approached fleet planning, by gathering every available piece of information, reasoning through it clearly, and making decisions based on what she actually knew rather than what she feared. She did not perform calm. She was calm, because she had decided to be, and she was one of the very few people I had ever met who could do that and mean it. There was one evening, about 5 months in, when she was more tired than usual and we were sitting in the quiet of our quarters on Luna, where we had moved to be close to the Institute. She was reading something, a briefing, always a briefing, and she set it down and looked at the ceiling for a moment. I used to imagine, she said, that the Velcora designation meant I had been exempted from something difficult, that I had been saved from something painful, in exchange for everything else. She was quiet. I know now that was not true, but I still think about it, about the years I spent constructing that idea so that the loss was bearable. I said nothing because she was not finished. And now I think, she said, about all the other women, the ones who were told the same thing I was told. who are still telling themselves whatever they need to tell themselves to make it bearable. She looked at me. We have to do something about that. We will, I said. Dr. Nair is already building a case. The Conclave Medical Council has a review process. It will take time. It has already taken time, she said. It has taken decades. Then we will move faster than decades, I said. She looked at me. The quiet between us was the comfortable kind, the same kind it had been since almost the very beginning, before we had names for what it was. All right, she said. And she picked up the briefing again. 3 months after that conversation, Nair received the first contact from another Vareth family. A message, sent through private channels, from a father on Vareth Prime whose daughter had been declared Velcora 2 years earlier. He had heard something. Through the quiet tributaries of information that moved through the conclave, regardless of what official channels said, about a physician on Luna who was asking new questions about old diagnoses. He wanted to know if his daughter could be seen, Doctor. Nair contacted me the same evening. We need a bigger team, she said. Send me the staffing request, I said. I'll have it approved by the end of the week. She sent it. I had it approved in 3 days. By the time our daughter arrived on a Tuesday, which seems about right, there were 47 names on the Institute's external consultation list. 47 women, most of them Vareth, some of them from other species with their own versions of the same diagnostic oversimplification, who had been told by their own medical systems that they were something other than what they actually were. 47 people waiting for someone to look more carefully. Our daughter was born healthy, which Dr. Nair told us with a brightness in her eyes that she did not bother to contain. She was a small and definite person who came into the world with the focused intensity of someone who had places to be. She had her mother's amber eyes and, according to everyone who looked at her, my tendency to furrow my brow when thinking through a problem, which Saratha found genuinely funny. We named her Kale. In one language it meant strong. In another, it meant returned. In both languages, it felt correct. Saratha held her for a long time without speaking. Then she looked at me and said, "She is going to be a problem for everyone." "Probably," I said. "We'll call it a feature." The call from the Vareth High Council came on a Wednesday morning, 8 weeks after Kale was born. I was in my office on the station. We had returned from Luna 2 weeks earlier, reviewing the latest round of coverage grid updates. Saratha was in the coordination room down the corridor with Drev and 2 members of the joint team, going over the second-year review of the Vareth Compact implementation. Kale was with the Institute's childcare team, who had all developed very strong opinions about her schedule and her preferences within approximately 4 days. The call was flagged as Priority 1 by the Vareth diplomatic system, which meant someone on the other end had pressed a button specifically to make us understand they considered this urgent. I let it wait 40 minutes before I accepted it. The delegation on screen was composed of 4 people, all in formal Dominion attire, all arranged in a way that was meant to signal authority. The one who spoke first was a senior council member named Tav, whom I had spoken with exactly twice before, both times through Drev as intermediary. "Commander Hale," he said. "We are calling to discuss the matter of Princess Saratha and the child." "Good morning," I said. "What specifically would you like to discuss?" He was very smooth, which they always were. What followed was 14 minutes of carefully structured language that managed to say several things at once, without saying any of them directly. It said that the Dominion was very interested in the child's well-being. It said that the Dominion felt they had an appropriate interest in the continuation of House Vel's line, which this child technically represented. It said that they would appreciate the opportunity to begin a conversation about the child's cultural education and identity, and about how Saratha's status within the Dominion might be reconsidered given recent developments. It did not say, "We were wrong, and we know it." It did not say, "What we did to her was unjust." It did not say anything that would require them to acknowledge that a system they had used for centuries had failed the very people it was supposed to serve. When he finished, I said, "Thank you. I'll share this call with my wife, and she can let you know how she would like to respond." He looked slightly surprised that I had not responded to any of the substance. "You understand," he said, "that the Dominion's interest in this matter is." "She will let you know," I said. "Have a good morning." I ended the call. I went down the corridor and knocked on the door of the coordination room. Saratha looked up when I entered. She read my expression in about 1 second. "The High Council," she said. "Yes." She nodded once. "Give me 20 minutes to finish this." She looked back at the table. "And make sure there is coffee." The 20 minutes was exactly 20 minutes. She came to my office, took the coffee, reviewed the recording of the call without interruption, and then sat for a moment. "They want to reclaim her," she said. diplomatically with language that prevents me from easily refusing. Yes, I said, and they want to restore my status. Because an infertile princess sent to humans was an embarrassment they had managed. A princess who has had a child who is the first of her kind in history is a resource they want access to. She was very still. They are not apologizing for the 20 years. They are trying to position themselves to benefit from what happened after. Yes, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Do you know what I want to do? Yes, I said, but I want to hear you say it. She set down the coffee. I want to go back, she said. Not because they deserve to have me return. Not because I owe them anything. But because there are women on Vareth Prime right now who are sitting in the same room I sat in at 17, being told the same thing I was told. And if I go back and I stand in that council chamber, and I say what I know to be true in front of the people who have the power to change it, some of those women will have shorter waits than I did. She looked at me. I want to take Kale. I held her gaze. All right, I said. And I want Dr. Nair's documentation, she said. Every case she has reviewed. Every name with permission. Every finding. I'll call her this afternoon, I said. She nodded. Then she said, and I want you beside me. Always, I said. The preparation took 6 weeks. It was not theatrical preparation, not speeches and strategy sessions, not political choreography. It was the kind of preparation that Saratha was expert in. Gathering information, reviewing it carefully, building a clear and well-supported case from evidence rather than emotion, Dr. Nair compiled her research into a formal document that ran to several hundred pages and was co-authored by 11 members of the Institute team. The list of cases documented was 63 long by the time it was finalized. 63 women across 3 species who had received categorical diagnoses from outdated single-variable tests. Drev, who had by this point become something genuinely like a friend, or at least the Vareth equivalent of one, which was a person who gave you accurate information without being asked, and occasionally looked out for your interests, without explaining why, helped arrange the return through channels that minimized the political theater while ensuring that the arrival would be properly noted. On the day we left for Vareth Prime, I stood at the viewport of the transport vessel and watched the station fall behind us. Kale was asleep in the carry cradle, a fact that she would not maintain for very long, and that we were all grateful for in the moment. Saratha was beside me, looking forward through the front viewport rather than back at the station. Are you nervous? I asked. She considered the question with the seriousness she gave to all questions. No, she said. I am clear. Vareth Prime was older than Earth in the way that Saratha had described. Heavier light, deeper colors. Architecture that had been built over centuries by people who had been very certain of their permanence. The capital was enormous, beautiful in the way of things that have been refined for so long that all the unnecessary elements have been removed. The official reception at the landing platform was significant. I had not expected it to be small. The Dominion was incapable of small when it involved something it considered politically important, but the size of the assembly was still notable. Members of the High Council, representatives of the major houses, cultural officials, diplomatic staff, and a crowd of onlookers that stretched back further than I could comfortably estimate. Saratha walked off the transport ahead of me. Not dramatically, not with performance. She simply walked, the way she always walked, with her spine straight and her pace exact and her amber eyes cataloging everything. She was carrying Kale. The crowd, which had been making the particular noise that large groups of people make when they are all having small conversations simultaneously, went quiet in stages. First the people nearest the platform, then the people behind them, then the whole space. Kale looked around with bright amber eyes and grabbed a piece of Saratha's formal attire with considerable enthusiasm. Someone near the front of the crowd made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. The council member who stepped forward to greet Saratha was not Tav. The person who stepped forward was an elderly woman, with the measured grace of someone who had held significant power for a very long time. I recognized her from the diplomatic briefings as First Counselor Vera, who was the highest-ranking member of the Vareth administrative body, who was not of royal blood. She stopped in front of Saratha and looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Kale. Then she said, in Vareth, something that my earpiece translated as, "Welcome home, daughter of House Vel." Saratha said, "Thank you. I have brought some things to discuss." There was a formal session of the High Council the following morning. Saratha presented Dr. Nair's research document in full. She did not summarize it. She walked through it section by section, citing findings, explaining methodology, presenting each case with the same quiet precision she brought to fleet planning and defense analyses, and everything else she did. She was in that chamber for 4 hours. I was outside in the corridor with Kale, who had strong opinions about this situation, and expressed them freely for approximately the first 90 minutes, before falling asleep with the suddenness of someone who had said everything that needed to be said. When Saratha came out, she handed me a data copy of the formal council record. They are commissioning a full review of the diagnostic protocol, she said. It will take time. They have agreed to a hold on new Velcora classifications pending the outcome. I looked at the record. That's significant, I said. It is the beginning of significant, she said. She looked at Kale, who was asleep against my shoulder. There is more to do. There is always more to do, I said. She looked at me. Yes, she said. That is not a complaint. 3 women approached her privately that afternoon. All Vareth, all from significant houses. Each of them had a daughter, or a sister, or a wife who had been declared Velcora. Each of them wanted to know if Dr. Nair's institute would see them. Saratha gave each of them the same information. The institute's contact protocol, the documentation of the review process, the name of the team member who handled external consultations. Then she came to find me and said, "We need a satellite facility." Vareth Prime? I said. "Close enough that travel is not a barrier for the women here," she said. "Dr. Nair will have thoughts on staffing." "I'll contact her tonight," I said. We stood for a moment in the corridor of the Vareth Council building. Through the wide window at the end, the older light of Vareth Prime's sun fell across everything in its heavier way. "My younger sister is coming to see me this evening," Saratha said. "I know," I said. "Drevid mentioned it. She was 8 when I was declared Velcora," she said. "She does not fully remember what I was like before it. She only knows the version of me that had already been shaped by it." She was quiet. "I am looking forward to introducing her to a different version." We ate dinner that evening with Saratha's sister, whose name was Liana, and who was sharp and curious, and who spent approximately the first 30 minutes of dinner studying me with the careful gaze that clearly ran in the family. Then she looked at Kale, who was sitting in a small carry chair and examining a piece of bread with deep suspicion. "She looks like you both," Liana said. "At the same time, how is that possible?" "Biology is interesting," I said. She looked at me. "You are not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" I said. She thought about it. "Something smaller," she said. Saratha said, without looking up from her plate. "He is the small one." I looked at her. She was entirely focused on her dinner, but the corner of her mouth had moved in a way I had learned to watch for. Liana looked between us, and then she laughed, and it broke something open in the room that had been held carefully shut for a very long time. On our last evening on Vareth Prime, before the transport back, Saratha and I stood on the terrace of the residence where we had been staying. The city spread below us, all that refined ancient architecture catching the last of the heavy light. Kale was inside with Liana, who had taken to her with an enthusiasm that suggested she was going to be a dedicated participant in our daughter's upbringing, whether we specifically invited her to be or not. "How does it feel?" I said. "Being back." Saratha looked at the city. "Like looking at a place that shaped you," she said, "and realizing that you are no longer the shape it tried to make you." I did not answer, because that was the kind of sentence that did not need anything added to it. She leaned slightly against me. We stood there for a while in the quiet of the old city and the heavy light. Behind us, inside, we could hear Liana talking to Kale and Vareth, and Kale making the sounds she made when she was interested in something and trying to figure it out, that low concentrated sound of a small person who had decided the world was worth investigating. I thought about what Admiral Crane had said to me on the first morning of all this. "Whatever you are doing, keep doing it." I thought about 11 minutes in a medical office. I thought about a coverage gap on a defensive grid. I thought about a Tuesday evening in a conference room. I thought about a woman who had walked off a ship as a political insult and had decided, one careful day at a time, that this version of her life was worth building. I thought about 63 cases in a research document. I thought about 47 names on a waiting list. I thought about a satellite facility that would be approved by the end of the month, staffed by people who believed that looking more carefully was always worth the time. I thought about Kale. The Vareth had sent Saratha to us because they considered her worthless. They had done this to embarrass us, to make the point that humanity was the kind of place you sent your discarded things. What they had not considered, because they had not yet learned how to consider it, was that humans have a particular relationship with the things that other people throw away. We look at them, we turn them over. We ask questions about them that have not been asked before. We refuse to accept the first answer, especially when the first answer was given by someone who did not think the question was worth a full 11 minutes of their time. We are inconveniently thorough. We are stubbornly curious. We are, as Saratha had told me in the very early days, strange. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, when everything lines up in the right way and the right people decide to look carefully at the right things, that stubbornness changes something. Inside, Kale had apparently reached a verdict about whatever Liana had shown her, because there was a burst of small decisive sound that was not quite a word yet but had the full confidence of one. Saratha heard it and smiled. "Come on," she said. "She's going to want to tell us something." We went inside.